Welcome to this episode of Hustle and Pro. I'm your host, Kelly Walker. We have Sammy Gonzalez and Greg Brinkley in the studio with us today. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. So I know you guys through our kind of nonprofit partnership that Lifestyle Frisco has with Vogel Alcove, and that's how I first got to know you. But then we're Instagram friends, and I see some of the things you guys are doing there, and notice the sports tie-ins, and so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about that and where you guys sit on some things in sports lately. So I guess let's get started.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us on. It's how many episodes now? 3 years now. So
this will probably be in the 115, 120 range.
That's
this
amazing.
episode. I don't even know. I don't have it labeled yet.
Well,
but it's not a baby anymore. I feel like.
Right.
I feel like it's getting better and better. So first of all, I want to know kind of your own sports backgrounds, because I don't know that yet. I know you like sports, but I don't know if you played sports as kids and what you did and what you were into, or if you still play something now. So maybe Sammy, give us an update.
Sure. So, growing up in South Texas, kind of small town, I had the opportunity to do everything. So I played football, basketball, baseball, track, all the way up through high school. I was one of the few people that was actually able to do that. Big school, but a lot of opportunity. So I always was just a huge fan of doing anything outside. I was the kid that could not sit still inside. So being outside and kind of growing up in the country was great. But just had a huge affinity for team sports, especially. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed the camaraderie. I really enjoyed helping other people out as well. I excelled at I think it was football and track, actually. I threw discus and shot put. But I loved baseball. I loved basketball. I mean, even to this day, like just picking up a basketball or walking by a shoe store.
Oh, yeah.
If I see a new pair of shoes, like, I want to play basketball. Like, it just happens all the time.
Well, do you?
I have. Gosh, it's been years since we had the Frisco Throwbacks was our team name that we played here. And we have some funny stories about playing some really good teams when we were not as good. But we haven't played in a while. Most recently, about a year ago, picked up mountain biking.
Okay.
Which, it can be a pretty solitary experience unless you have a crew. Mm-hmm. And we're just fortunate. We have about 7 different guys that we ride with pretty consistently, almost on a weekend basis. And the sport of mountain biking has been really interesting. And there's a ton of great trails around here, too.
Yeah, you got the biking bug when everybody realized let's do something else right now, because we couldn't do all the things we were used to doing, all the organized sports or watching sports. There was nothing to do for a while, so we did that too. We got more into biking, just more like family recreational stuff. Okay, so you mentioned South Texas. What were your teams?
So I grew up with all things Houston. Like I was
afraid of that. I figured you were going to say that.
Well, this is my take on sports and rooting for sports. So I grew up with Houston Astros, Houston Oilers, San Antonio Spurs. Those were my teams. The Oilers abandoned me and then disappeared, right? So, I was without a team for a while.
So did you adopt the Texans, or are you now a Cowboys fan?
No, I moved up to Dallas without a team.
Okay.
But so when I moved to Dallas, I said, you know what? I'm going to plant my flag and I'm going to root for the home team. I did.
Okay.
And so the Cowboys are my team. And I was always an Astros fan. They will always be my number one. But I like to root for the home teams as well. So I started rooting for the Rangers. Now they put both teams in the same division. Yeah. So I root for the Rangers anytime they're not playing the Astros.
Yeah, so this recent series was probably fun for you because the Astros figured out our ticket and we could not figure theirs out. So.
And I'm going to the game on Sunday, so I'll be there rooting for the Astros. But it's okay.
Okay, then moving on. Greg, what about you?
So grew up in Georgetown, Texas, and played every sport that I could. Sports were definitely the number one aspect of my childhood. Mm-hmm. And I look back with so many fond memories. I learned so many life lessons from it. Baseball by far was my love when I was a young kid, getting up into about the junior high age. Mm-hmm. And then I transitioned to basketball. And so I'm not a very tall guy. I'm 5'5", 5'6", so a lot of people are surprised when they hear that I played basketball, but that was my passion. And so played that through high school. When I got into college, it was every intramural sport that I could get at, I could play.
Yeah.
And I think as I got older, I was very fortunate to meet this guy, Sammy Gonzalez, and we just hit it off. And we've played on softball teams together, baseball teams together. Neither of us had played soccer. So we decided, let's put together an outdoor soccer team, and did that, had a blast. And now we're into mountain biking, like you said. And it's been a fun journey for me because I never realized that mountain biking is an extreme sport if you choose to pursue it with that type of
that
intent.
level, yeah.
And we get after it, and it's such an exhilarating experience. And you talk about like growth and development and always continue to challenge yourself. That's filled that void that I think we had when COVID hit and we couldn't play sports together. Mountain biking came in. It's just taken us to a new level. It's been so much fun.
Isn't it interesting, though, as you evolve and your life changes, it still goes back to like wanting to compete, even with yourself, right?
Absolutely.
If you're talking about mountain biking. The competitive part of your own, like, want to get better at things, but it doesn't really matter, the sport. It's just either being with a group of like-minded people and pushing yourself.
Absolutely.
Like you learn a brand new sport. Or, I mean, I know you've ridden a bike before, but you know what I mean? You can take on a new challenge as you get older, but it all boils back to the same reasons why.
Yeah, and it's such a confidence boost, especially when you try something brand new. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit intimidated when we first started riding bikes, because you go to some of these trails and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to ride on some dirt and go through the woods. And then you see these courses and you have that moment of like, can I do this?
Right.
And this actually looks really scary. And then as you start progressing and you start growing in your skills and you overcome those fears, that translates to like every other aspect of your life.
Right.
And you just have this like enhanced self-belief in yourself.
Yeah, baby steps and small goals and small challenges, because you can't just walk up to those courses, or you're doing trails, but there's a course in my mind I'm thinking of up off 423 that you see these hills or these jumps, and I'm like, there is no way, like there's zero chance I'm going to do this.
Right.
But then if you do take it in baby steps, like I'm scared of stuff like that. So I'm talking like, I'll stand at the top and maybe walk down once, or I don't know, figure it out to where I chip away at it. But then when you do it, you're like, okay, I cannot believe I just figured that out and I'm not at the hospital with broken bones.
Right. Yeah. We have been very fortunate to, we've had our fair share of spills and wrecks and all that, as you learn and grow. And that's something that Greg and I are huge into, is like personal development and growth and learning. So one of the things that, as we were talking about this podcast, we talked a little bit about like, what is it in our life, like from back in the day, that really stood out? And sports is always just that common thread.
Right.
And then looking at some of the different athletes that, came to mind. So like one of my all-time favorite athletes, someone who's inspired me even to this day, was Cal Ripken Jr.
Yes.
And I've always taken that to heart. What he did was being able to have that longevity, being able to consistency, exactly, that perseverance, right? And he even admitted in many of his articles that he read, because I used to clip them all out of magazines and stuff, but he said, sometimes I got lucky. Like my kids were born on off days. It's like, so how lucky is that? That it just happened. But that's a vein that's carried through, even like in youth sports, like you're seeing kids now, like you're having to struggle and find your way through so much adversity when you're young, and then that carries over. So that's what I did. It's like I carried over that mentality of you can work through it, you can get to it, you can do the little things to get you over that hill. So standing at the top of the hill, which we do many times in mountain biking, and think, I'm just going to walk this right now. And you walk down it, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, let me see if I can slowly roll down it. And then you do it again. So next thing you know, 4 or 5, tries deep, you're rolling right through it. And then, maybe you wreck, maybe you don't, but it's still fun.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the personal growth and development. So a project that you guys work on, I want you to tell me a little bit about it. But you're talking about living the pursuit of growth. You talk about challenges and growth and failure and accomplishments. And I know that you have a podcast also. And I've spied a theme in some of your episodes, which is sports, having athletes or organizers of sports or maybe former athletes also on there. So, that's also why I'm curious about, like, what is the synergy with the personal growth and the sports thread that you see so much? And you just touched on part of it. But also, like, you can't plan every step of your sports career, and you have to sometimes have luck involved or be resilient because of injuries. I mean, you talked about injuries, mountain biking, but every sport, if you don't expect an injury, you're fooling yourself. Yeah. So I don't know, Greg, talk about that. Like, what do you see with the pursuit of growth, and why sports is a match with that?
Well, I think it's a perfect match. And to give it a little bit of background, The Pursuit of Growth is a project that Sammy and I put together. We wrote a book called The Pursuit of Growth. We have a YouTube show called The Pursuit of Growth Show, very creative. We also have a weekly blog that we put out, and so you can get that, shameless plug, at www.livetpg.com.
And I'll link to it in the show notes, too.
Cool. Thank you.
But the pursuit of growth ultimately is a lifestyle, and it's a commitment to enhance your life through personal development by focusing on growth goals and habits in 11 key areas of life. You talk about sports, it's so much mindset. It's so much just what's going on between our ears. And that's the same thing with our lives. We live in a world where there's more anxiety, depression, fear, stress, and trauma that's going on in our country and our world than at any time in recorded history.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an epidemic. And the pursuit of growth basically is a lifestyle that just goes straight in the face of that and really helps to teach people how to take control of your life, how to have the right perspective, and really, what are the ways that you should be growing and learning that's going to put yourself in a spot where your life is going to go well?
Because otherwise, it's detrimental.
Absolutely.
To your mental health, your physical health. It all is one big idea of you either tackle it or it tackles you.
And
right?
this is where the sports connection comes in. I think this is why so many athletes are attracted to what Sammy and I are talking about, is in life and in sports, there is going to be failure. There is going to be obstacles. There are going to be trials. You should start looking at those things, not as bad things, but as opportunities. You should look at your trials as good. I have a chance to be better. I have a chance to get sharper. I have a chance to see if I can overcome this particular scenario. And I think what's interesting about sports, I know growing up, Sammy and I, we talked about this before we started recording the podcast. One of the things that we learned as youth was what it means to lose, what it means to win, and actually, how do we handle that correctly? We learn what it means to sacrifice, to persevere. We learn what it means to ultimately have to get to a spot to where we faced, for the first time in our lives as kids, pressure. So we had to perform. Oftentimes, it was just maybe mom and dad watching from the stands, or maybe you're in front of your high school and it's a packed crowd. But you've got to get to a point where you're in a position that you've got to make it happen. And so all that hard work that you put in starts coming out.
Yep.
And I just think it's just a natural tie-in with sports, and I'd like to let Sammy chime in on this as well, but I think that's why so many of the athletes that we talk to just love sharing those stories about all those different topics that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it comes down to that common thread of like understanding yourself as well. I know we've had recently Corey Proctor, former Dallas Cowboy, on ours, and he was fantastic about talking about it's like it really took a chance for him to learn who he was as well as he was growing. And I think in sports, you kind of have to always have that in the back of your mind. It's like, who are you? You know you can do it. You are also impacting the people around you. So like if you come to, quote unquote work or practice, right? You come there with the right attitude, the right mindset. That can infect everyone else, and then you can work together as a team.
And it can affect them positive or negative, whichever way you're choosing to do it. And like with your example of Corey Proctor, I think it's interesting sometimes when maybe athletes are having to learn who they are through their sport because they're going through it at a young age. Like he's this big offensive lineman, right? And so like he's probably always been told he's certain types of person or whatever, or his role on the field is this or that. But as you mature and then he becomes a professional, like he probably grew up a lot and had to figure that out in a different way than most people who aren't professional athletes. But that's fascinating to hear guys like that talk about it.
One thing that he mentioned that I thought was really fascinating was he talked about the importance of coaches.
Yep.
And really, while he was a professional caliber athlete, he needed these coaches to take him to the next level, especially when he got into the NFL. And he realized very quickly that when he was on the practice squad for the Detroit Lions, that he needed a lot of additional help to be able to get him to that next level. And I think that translates to our lives outside of the sports world. We all need coaches in the key areas of our life. And we talked about this with Corey. We all have blind spots.
Oh, yeah.
We have things that we don't see about ourselves. And when you can surround yourself with the right people that can help you identify what those blind spots are and then help you to push and persevere ahead of that, it's huge. And I think, again, it just goes with sports. That's it, the coaching, the teamwork, and then having the goals. I mean, when you're playing sports,
goals is a big one.
You are focused on where you're going. And I think that, again, that just translates over into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, it's that you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And, a lot of us like to think we're excelling in this, so we do know it all, right? But there is always more. There's always more to learn. especially in sports, but in normal life and work and all the things, there's always someone else's perspective that can teach you something
Absolutely.
to make you better at the piece you're doing. So I also want to talk about, you mentioned something a while ago, Sammy, that reminded me of this about bringing a certain attitude like into the locker room or on the field with your teammates. On one of your blog posts, I think on your Pursuit of Growth site, you guys had something about Bruce Lee talking about
Yes.
like the best tip ever or something, whatever you guys called it, but it was about doing one more rep, which all goes back to like pushing yourself past plateaus. And this is, sports and fitness and athlete, all these other things too. But it made me think about certain athletes like Alex Smith or Dak who face these really big injuries on a huge stage. And how are they going to, what is their mindset? How are they going to make a decision to take a baby step and then ultimately push themselves past? And thinking about like the Dirks and the LeBrons who are kind of known for like the gym rat, thing. Like, I'm going to be the first one in, I'm going to be the last one out,
Yep.
and how that rubs off on all of the people around you.
Yeah, and that blog post, actually, that Greg wrote that, so I'm going to let him touch on that here shortly after my small little answer there. But one of the things is that, I guess, in that same vein was, we talk to some of these athletes, we talk about people that are overcoming a lot of adversity, like, Dak and Alex Smith. When you hear their stories, like, it's that mindset, right? But it's also, they're putting a lot of effort into it as well. But look at the people they have around them. Like, they have their champions around them. They have the people that are going to inspire them, motivate them, and they surround themselves with the quality type of people. And I think that's like also coming from a sports background, they have their crew around them. They're going to help uplift them. I think it was Dak, like, recently. I mean, you look at him, he's on, Instagram, and like he's smiling, having fun. Like, I think he was like delivering something like a donation to somebody.
Yeah, I saw him serving to-go meals to maybe a homeless shelter or something recently.
Exactly. And so, like, that's the thing. It's like
with lots of smiles.
Of course, yeah. Well, the
and
thing
like,
about
this
him,
bumps for everybody. And I mean, he wants to have a full conversation with everybody who walks past him.
Yeah. Oh, well, just this morning, before we started recording this, I was on a Zoom call with an artist, and he was born without hands, but he's an amazing, like, fine artist. And he talked about resilience. And I think that goes back into like learning it when he was younger as well. But he had a sports tie-in too. But his whole thing was, and I think kids learn this today too, and athletes learn this. And I'm sure Dak went through this as well. And so did Alex Smith, because he talks about it. Don't deny your feelings of, whenever something bad goes on, when something bad happens. We saw Dak with the ankle, right, crying, because, he was in that emotional state, right? And everyone, I think the whole stadium watched him and probably like had that same feeling with him.
Yeah.
But then
including Jason Garrett.
Everybody, right? So then he like takes that, uses it as motivation, and then now he's going to come back bigger, better, stronger. Alex Smith, same thing. He wanted to get back on that field. He never denied himself that opportunity to have those feelings, but then he moved past those.
Yeah, because you do have to process it.
Yep.
It's happening to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was the main thing that we talked about this morning was don't deny it, apply it. And I love that theme. And it like just gave me extra motivation. As soon as Greg pulled up in the parking lot, I talked to him about that. I was like, I'm pumped up already. Like, I want to go do something.
Yeah. Especially with the artist. I mean, that is his life. That is his circumstance. And it goes back to how you choose to see that.
Yeah.
Is it something that's going to overcome you, or can you figure out a way to overcome it, push yourself even farther?
Growing up, every athlete that I played with and played against, I think those that always had the competitive advantage were the ones that had it in between their ears. It was the mindset, right? I'm a believer that the way you think determines the way you feel determines the way you act, and the way you act determines the way you live. So
okay, say that all again one more time.
The way you think determines how you feel. How you feel determines how you act, and how you act determines how you live. It all starts in between the ears. And there's a quote that I love that I'm not sure, it's been attributed to Henry Ford. I've seen it attributed to Confucius. But it says, he who says he can't and he who says he can are both right. And I think that's so much when you talk about people that are facing injuries, obstacles, challenges in their life. And I love, you alluded to the Bruce Lee blog that we wrote about. I actually, many years ago, bought Bruce Lee's I guess it's his workout like journal. And so it was actually put together by his family and his close friends, and they document all these different ways about how he went to like approach his workout, which is just insane and completely motivating. Well, the gentleman that wrote the foreword to the book talked about how he would work out with Bruce Lee, and that Bruce would always challenge him at the end of the workout, hey, let's do one more, let's do one more. And so after Bruce Lee died, he adopted a saying, every time he worked out, I'm going to do one more for Bruce Lee. And so when I read that, I got so inspired by it that I started telling people. And so when I'm in the gym now, or if I'm running, or we're doing anything, in my mind, every single day, do one more for Bruce Lee. So it's that mindset of just push yourself a little bit more.
A little bit.
Little bit. And I think that goes exactly with these athletes, especially when you get to the professional level. Those guys are, sure, they're talented. They've got amazing skills. But it's what they've done with them that's taken them to that level. And while they may not say, do one more for Bruce Lee, I guarantee you there's a why that's inside their mind that continues to push them. And that's what separates them from the people that have a lot of skills but never quite make it.
Yeah, their do one more is probably, I don't know, I think more like a family member who taught them the game. You know, a dad or an uncle or somebody like that, or a mom who is going through something and raised you. Like we hear that from Dak a lot.
Right.
You know, those kinds of things where it's a little bit, like that's what I picture a lot of these athletes. Like Jason Witten, we always heard about his family situation, and that pushed him to be a better man on and off the field. And, you know, those things that are going on between their ears that pushed them one more rep to be a better everything.
You know what? I adopted that, and I am no Bruce Lee by any means. As much as I try.
He's being modest.
Right. But my thing was, and a coach told me this a long time ago, was never leave on a missed shot. So like in basketball, right? You never leave on the missed shot. You shoot until you make the last one, and that can be your last one.
I love that. I think about that a lot too. So Greg, we're similar in that like your baseball was kind of your main love when you were younger. Mine was softball. And so with my dad as a coach, it was always like you can't end on a bad bobble or missed hit or whatever. And so I was pitching some batting practice to my son's team the other day, and you know, we do like it's full count scenario. What are you going to do with the next pitch? And if I pitch him a ball, I'm like, no, no, I want to give you something you can hit. Like I don't want you to walk out of the batting cage on watching a bad ball go past you. Like, no, hold on, let me get you a strike so you can hit it. I want them to feel that like ending on something good that they've done, to build off of that momentum.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember playing basketball as a kid in the driveway. You know, you start wrapping things up, and it's always like, it's Game 7. It's the NBA Finals. I've got the ball. I'm going to go around the screen. Shot. Oop, missed it. Guess what? Go back in time. Let's start that over.
Put some more time on the clock.
Put some more time on the clock. Here we go. And you do it over and over until you make it. And then you walk off the court with your hands held high. No doubt about it.
Yes, that's the beauty. We can write our own awesome sports dreams and sports stories. Well, Sammy and Greg, thank you so much for coming in here. I feel like there's a lot more we could explore, and maybe we will on some future episodes. I like when y'all were talking, I wrote down Rafa. I'm like, we need to do an episode, 2 things while we were talking. If you haven't watched the 60 Minutes about Rafael Nadal, like, let's watch it, or let's talk about it.
Yes.
Because his question was, have the wins done more for you than the losses? That kind of thing, and like such a good topic.
I like that.
And then your Frisco throwbacks. I'm like, let's do an episode on throwback uniforms in basketball.
Oh, I love it. As a designer, like a background in graphic design and art, I would definitely love to talk about that.
So we'll lock those in soon and have you guys back in here.
We can also share a short story about when we played against Del Harris, his team, against the Frisco Throwbacks, and things did not go so well. So we learned a valuable lesson in losing. So that may be a tease for next time.
Very good tease. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Hustle and Pro. We'll see you next time.